The first book of the Kings, session 27. And let's finish with chapter 9. We ended yesterday with verse 21. So, all the children that were left after them, these are all the parasites in the land of promise that God said, destroy them because they will be a thorn in your side. And all of them that were left, and that the children of Israel did not destroy, upon those did Solomon levy a tribute of bondservants unto this day. So we did look at the risks that he was taking with that in yesterday's session. Continuing with verse 22. But of the children of Israel did Solomon make no bondmen, but they were men of war, and his servants, and his princes, and his captains, and rulers of his chariots, and his horsemen. If you see, it's quite interesting in these modern days, even that the Jews and the Muslims um, will not actually charge each other interest. I know, the Jews from the synagogue of Satan is ruling the world, and they absolutely live on the backbone of slavery, interest, and inflation. But general Jewish businesses, normal men, women, and children, as well as the Muslims, they don't charge interest. Many of them will only go according to their law, both the Muslims and the Jews, that says you don't charge your brother any interest, but you can charge the pagan. Just like our Bible says, the Torah says, you don't eat any unclean animals or any animals that has, been hit by a chariot and they died, or he broke his leg and he died. You don't eat that meat because it's unclean. But you don't have to waste it either. You can give it to the pagan. Because they're going to eat it anyway. And to throw it away is a waste of food. They don't care about clean or unclean. And it's not a law for them because they don't belong to the kingdom of Yahuwah. So here we can see that Solomon is, not that I necessarily agree with the concept like you saw yesterday, but here he is making his own tribesmen, his own brothers, his own people, the people of Israel. He's making them captains and managers and princes, and they are doing work for him and his army and in his palace and, all over the country. But they are not slaves. They are not like the heathen that's still within the borders of the promised land. They are not slaves. So it is a good thing on the one side. But on the other side, it teaches a specific kind of people that they are better than everyone else. Israel is set apart. Yes, they are different to everybody else. The whole world is worshipping the sun god, but Israel worships on the Sabbath day, the creator God, the only God there is. But when you have a lot of slaves working for you and you are only overseeing them, you start treating them with disdain. You start feeling that you are better than them. Um, And of course, Israel is better than the pagans because they are worshipping the true God. If they kept to the covenant of God, absolutely. But developing this kind of character where you look down upon slave people because you are not a slave, they're a slave, they're less of a citizen than you, you kind of develop the character that puts you in a very bad position of becoming comfortable and sluggish and lazy. And the moment your slaves are doing everything and you're doing nothing, you're actually taking a huge risk of being overtaken by them. And we see exactly that happening in the Bible, where these parasites, Emusites, Jebusites, Hivites, Hittites, all these tites, where they eventually took over Israel, where they conformed the whole country into a pagan worship system. And eventually that led to the exile of both the house of Judah and the house of Israel. So on the one side, you need to keep yourself separate. But on the other side, Jehovah says work for 6 days a week. And even if a pagan is your slave, even if he doesn't worship the same God as you, the way in which you treat him also shows what kind of a person you are, and it also shows what kind of a God you serve. So even if the Israelites did have slaves, if they treated them, you know, do I say with respect? Because if you look at people today, the way they treat the guys that put in the petrol, the way they treat waiters that serves them in restaurants, the way you treat somebody that is much lower than yourself, that shows what kind of a person you are. Because, like Yeshua said, what good do you do when you treat your own brothers well and you greet your own brothers and they who greet you? Doesn't the pagans do the same? You must greet everyone in the same way, not only those who greet you. Yeshua says, if you treat a rich man that comes into your congregation with a ring on his finger and wealthy clothes, if you tell him, come sit here, honorable guest, but then a poor man comes into the congregation and you tell him, go sit there at my feet because you're a slave, you're a servant, you are low. Yeshua says that is not the kind of character that the man and woman of God must show. So, what did Solomon do? If he only stayed on the covenant, if he only stayed in the way of the Torah and he didn't deviate, Israel could have prospered so beautifully. But he took too much taxes. He gave away too much of his land. He allowed too many pagans to come into his trust circle and into his innermost workforce where you've got managers and so on, and the skilled workmen. He married too many pagan women and he allowed pagans to be the slaves. It's the reverse of what happened in Egypt. So, and the same thing, everything works in cycles. As the Israelite people were enslaved and hulle is geonderdruk, they were crushed. Pharaoh tried to crush them in Egypt, but they prospered. Slowly but surely, while you are sleeping, your slaves are growing stronger and are multiplying. And the same thing happened here in Israel. While Israel enjoyed a period of peace and prosperity, the Bible says when they say peace and prosperity, then sudden destruction comes over them. And this is exactly the slave multitude started growing and started infiltrating, and they started marrying through against the Torah's commandments, and they started influencing the children of Israel. Verse 23, these were the chief of the officers that were over Solomon's work, 550, which bore rule over the people that was working. So the children of Israel were the slave drivers of the heathen slaves. All right. But Pharaoh's daughter came up out of the city of David unto her house, which Solomon had built for her. And then he built Milu. So Pharaoh's daughter stayed with her husband in Jerusalem. But then remember, Pharaoh burned the city or the town of Gezer. And then Solomon rebuilt Gezer. And Pharaoh gave Gezer to his daughter. So Solomon probably built her a beautiful palace in Gezer. And she decided to move there. And, then he built Milu. So whatever is in Milu, I don't know. 3 times a year did Solomon offer burnt offerings and peace offerings upon the altar which he built unto Yahuwah. And he burnt incense upon the altar that was before Yahuwah. So he finished the house. Very interesting. If you look at this, and if you know the tabernacle, which is the same layout as the temple, then you can see that it was, if we read correctly, that it's Solomon who sacrificed on the sacrifice altar in the forecourt. But it's also Solomon that burnt incense on the incense altar before the veil. But yet he wasn't from the tribe of Levi or from the family of Aaron. He was from Judah. But here we see that the king from Judah is also doing priestly work. And that is what Melchizedek is all about. Melech Tzaddik, the righteous king who is the high priest. And if I look at the last couple of chapters of many of the Old Testament prophets, I've done a whole series called The Age to Come. And I look at that, then I see the prince is the one who sacrifices in the millennium. He's the one who burns the incense on the incense altar. He's the one who leads the worship as if he is priest. And therefore, just again, it is confirming for me how Solomon is such a messianic picture. The prince, the son of the king, who is king, but is also doing this amazing priestly work. And of course, 3 times a year he did this. Why? Because the Torah says 3 times a year during the feast of unleavened bread, Shavuot, and Tabernacles, all men will come up to Jerusalem. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. So if you look at the maps, they say where this Ezion Eber was, this port, it was like a port where the ships were, right? Ezion Geber, sorry. Ezion Geber means like the hip bone of a giant, a large hip bone. It seems to be in the Gulf of Aqaba. When you look at the whole map between Egypt and Israel, and you can believe the historians that shows you where the land of Edom is, and Eloth and Ezion Geber and all these places, it looks like these navy ships didn't go onto the ocean. They went onto the sea, the sea that was inside the land, that was in the continent. You've got the Red Sea, and you've got the what is that other Suez, the Suez Canal, the Gulf of Suez. So you've got all these inland seas, and if we read it looks like this is where Solomon's ships were going on. And remember, it was Hiram. Hiram sent the navy, his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, to work together with the servants of Solomon. And probably they were very successful. When you spend a bit of time and you listen to people talking about how the Indians came to America and how, long before the white people got there, and how they did trade with the Phoenicians and the people from the east that came to them on ships. A lot of people are doing the historical research to show that these were Solomon ships. He worked together with Hiram from Tyre. And you also have the Phoenicians that were also very talented shipmen, navy seals, you can almost call them. They knew how to travel on sea, and they did a lot of trade. And you cannot help but wonder sometimes, because a lot of these Indians in America specifically, if you listen to the people talking about their very ancient history, how they've got names in their Indian language that sounds like Hebrew, and that's got Hebrew meanings. And they will even tell you, my name means God is my help. And then it's got Yahoo in it somewhere. And they've got Hebrew writings of their ancient rock writings, and pictures they painted, and totem poles they made. And of course, they also started worshipping pagan gods, but they had this ancient, almost forgotten memory of the God of the Hebrews. Anyway, that's another deep dive. So interesting, in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 36, we have the king of Judah and the king of Israel wanting to work together and do trade, and also use these ships in Ezion Geber. It is Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, that joined himself with Ahaziah, king of Israel. Now, Ahaziah was very wicked, very evil. And Jehoshaphat joined himself with Ahaziah to make ships to go to Tarshish, to go and do trade. And they made their ships in Ezion Geber. So they had a factory. They had a ship-making factory in Ezion Geber, in the port that Solomon created in Ezion Geber. But because you have joined yourself with Ahaziah, Yahuwah says to Jehoshaphat, Yahweh is going to break your works. And the ships were broken so that they were not able to travel to Tarshish. So this port that Solomon started, it started off well. It was probably very, very successful. But by the time of Jehoshaphat, I don't think that port was working any longer. All the ships were broken. None of the ships were functioning anymore. And by this time, the prophecies through Isaiah and Jeremiah and Hosea about the exiles were becoming prominent. So the kingdom was very, very, very close to crumbling. The servants of Hiram was working with the servants of Solomon on the ships. All these guys with a lot of navy knowledge, ocean, sea knowledge. And they came to Ophir and fetched from there gold, 420 talents, and they brought it to King Solomon. So nobody knows where Ophir is. I tried to find it. There's a lot of speculation. Nobody knows where it is. But probably these ships were sailing to Ophir, this magical, mysterious treasure island place. And they found a lot of gold there. So they probably mined. If you look at the mining industry today, and you look at the navy industry, the import and export on the seas today, and you look at the ports today, at the shores of all the countries, and you look at the construction industry today, it is massive, it is complicated, it is huge. And yet it seems that Solomon was doing all of it. He was doing the navy, he was doing the construction, he was doing the mining. Um, we ran a business, and at one stage we had about 40 people working for us. It was a nightmare to make sure all the people's got work to do and they're not wasting your time and your money, and to make sure they're doing their work right and to follow up on all the problems. It's an absolute headache. I cannot imagine how huge this kingdom and all these enterprises of Solomon were. And yet he kept a handle on it, as long as his hand was in the hand of Yahuwah. But the moment he let go of Yahuwah, I think this all started to crumble. And then the cracks started to show where the pagan Luciferian infiltration came and utterly destroyed the kingdom of the north up to this day, as God is slowly but surely gathering the kingdom of the north again, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And it totally put the kingdom of the south in such turmoil. These things are amazing. The Bible is amazing. History is amazing. And I'm so glad that Father allowed all this record keeping so we can have a look at it. We're going to study in the next session Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, or Shiva. So you've got Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction at CERN, but you've also got Shiva, that means 7. Satan and the light kingdom, always using the same names, using the same symbols, using the same everything for 2 different purposes. All right, shalom, and may you enjoy your day.